All right, welcome back. So, what are we up to? Week 11, week 12, week 11. All right, we are on. I don't know. I got all the stuff out though. We're on contrast. Uh, let's jump into contrast, and then because today, for people who watch it today, is I'll talk about the poster and the rough final that is due a little bit too. And I talked about that in the past. So today is contrast. So many different types of contrast. I think we all just generally think like contrast. You think black to white, and that's the first one we got going on here is color contrast. Um, Easy peasy, black and white. I mean, we talked about when we talked about the color system, yellow and purple, blue and orange. Like contrasting colors, opposite on the color wheel. So it's kind of like the easy one to immediately hit if you have, or well, I won't get into it. I'm going to jump around. So color contrast in itself, from black and white to all the opposing colors on the color wheel, complementary colors, create a color contrast. And in that, you create a visual interest. So if you have a full, like a bluish background with like things happening in blues, but then you put an orange thing in it, it's going to contrast. It's going to step out. It's going to look different. And you can adjust that contrast by changing it. Like you can go, if it's everything's light blue to dark blue, that's contrast. Or then you go through the colors of the rainbow. If it's green, it's a little more contrast. Yellow, more, red, actually red, not so much on blue. And then orange, it will make a jump. So it's, down and dirty, the way you think about it, it's just opposite colors will create that color contrast. And when developing a piece, when you're working on, say, your poster or say the next piece you're going to work on for me, think about the color contrast. What do you want to have jump out? What shouldn't jump out? You're dealing with a music festival. You want some bright things with some dark things. You want to create interest within the piece. We don't want to end up with a neutral. When you look at it, it kind of looks all the same. And a great way to start is by contrast and contrast with color. You have all your elements. It's just how do you separate your elements? Try with color. Value contrast. That's the lightness or darkness of a color. So as I earlier just said, you can have like a sea of light blue and then add in dark blue effects. That's a contrast. It's not stark in any way, like a major contrast, but it will end up being a value contrast. And you can't, it works. It works well because there's pieces, and we'll see a piece where you're only dealing with one color. And if you deal with one color, I believe this was the one with one color. I'll talk through it. You need to make things pop or set off. So you might make some very, very light blue areas and some dark blue areas, and that's creating that value contrast. It's the same color throughout, but it adds a contrast in there. Think about when we did the monochromatic. How do you make that spot color? That's very important to learn how to do. That we've done is using, just the same two color, a 5% tint versus 100% tint is going to contrast. It's going to create a contrast. It doesn't always have to be, 100%, black and white. Like, no, you can do a subtler value contrast in a piece. Size contrast. Well, that's the easy one. Big versus small, right? How do you, just varying the size of the elements within the piece also helps tell us the hierarchical purpose of each of those pieces. If you have a group of people and they're small in the background and then one big person in the front, should be drawing this. I have a bunch of little people and then one big person and little, they're like little people. The size difference is the contrast. So we don't necessarily pay attention to the people that are small in the background, but we pay more attention to the person in the foreground that is bigger. That size contrast helps us to understand what we should be viewing in that piece. What's just background, quote unquote, noise, and what is the main purpose? What am I looking at? I mean, look at your Marvel movie posters where it's just like always split down the middle. I'm the most important character. Then I'm second. And these four characters are all like, the same size. And then they put the smaller ones. And it's always like in a circle or split down the middle directly, but it's always in size relationship to what's most important to least important. Just like the more you know, like the more you see these things, the more you're like, oh my God, it's just a formula. Sometimes design is a formula. All right. Shape. Do I need to talk more about that? It's shape. I have this, or I have this. Like it sharp versus soft. Square versus organic. That shape can set things off. How do you could have a really rigid design, really structured design, like, kind of like, I can't draw light on here. Like it's gridded off almost, and everything's like imperfect. And then in the background, you have like something flowing through that to like offset that grid system, and then you got a picture here and a picture here. And it offsets where you're playing with that contrast of, geometric versus organic, or, organic. So other ways to like work with it, and they work together. Like you can get them to work together, and it stands out. Like, why you question, like, why is this important? It's a big organic shape. Well, because I got information in there or something like that. So dealing with that shape contrast, pretty nice. Texture contrast. Texture. When did we talk about texture? A while back. The texture, soft versus like rough. And you can show that in the design. You can have that contrast in the design. I talked about that earlier today in this class. We do an 8-week version. It's doubled up. And it's texture. And I showed the piece with the asphalt and the smooth piece of paper with the cutouts. I don't know if you remember that from the texture, but that's a texture contrast. The colors were both blacks and grays. Like everything was black and gray. The shoe had a little bit of blue in it, but it was a texture contrast, and it worked so well. It was so cool. I love that piece when we talk about it, but that's how you can do that with a texture contrast. Next up, typography. If you're not in typography yet, you'll learn about it soon, and hopefully we can use some of it within your design. But there's a reason why we have certain types of typography. We call it, like titles, and then subheaders, and then body copy. So if we're to look at that, this is actually a subheader. It's bold, and this is the body copy, which is not bold. So I created the contrast by making sure that this was bold. It may be 1 point bigger, but it's not much. I didn't have a lot of room to work with, but that's how you create hierarchy and listing. And like, a really, if this said, there's no room, I can't go any higher. If like really big and bold, it said contrast, and contrast was huge, Then we have our header, contrast to subheader to body copy. And when you do that, it's all about making the fonts stick out and contrast with each other. And we know which is most important, which is secondary, and which is third. And it's done through contrast of typography. So that's how you do that. Spatial, placing things. How do you place them? Crowded or open? We'll get into this in movement. Spatial contrast in movement, which I can't remember which week is movement. You'll totally get it. You and just like, you know, make my quick little drawings here. If you have an area and like there's, you know, tight little dots, and then it slowly goes out to fewer and fewer. You know, like there's the contrast. Like it blends from being very dense to very open. And you can do that with elements and all sorts of things within the design. If you want people like concentrated in areas, you know, you have like all your pictures concentrated in one area of the design, you know, and it's really busy. And then you have your text. And they'll feel like two different areas, and there'll be space because text isn't as dense as imagery. And so that helps with that spatial contrast. Millions of things that you can do to help offset and change things within a piece. Temperature contrast. Warm versus cool. You know, that's like the baseline right there. Having warm versus cool, which just, you know, takes us all the way back to color contrast is temperature contrast. These two work hand in hand in the way they affect things. But yeah, you have warm versus cool. You can change the dynamics of an entire piece. You can have half a piece. You can design it in such a way, and I feel like I'm thinking of something like where, you know, you have a piece and it's split down the middle and one half's warm and one half's cool. If you took my photography class with those duotones, like that's the hot thing to do. You have like a red light on one side and a blue light on the other, and it's always warm versus cool when they do that. And then they do the duotone reverse in the middle, and that's how you get that cool effect. And that's really just a temperature contrast in the way things work. Look at our examples. Like this old styly piece here. We're dealing with kind of an extreme. So when I had you all do the form project, I used black, 50% gray and white. Here they're using black and like a 75% gray and white. And so it's a much more stark difference, and it's keeping the black and the gray very close to each other, but then offsetting with the white. So that's where we get the really big contrast. You have, it's not like, it is almost black and white, but be able to set off some interesting features. They're using the gray, but they're not doing a 50% gray. They're doing that, they're doing like a 75, 80% gray with the black. And it's noticeable here, like how close they are. But it affects this piece, but it does create a stark contrast within this piece. And it's quote unquote one color. The gray could be produced. This could be, this yellowing along the edge is just because it's old and it's not part of the piece. So that yellowing, this would be a piece of paper, and then it would be printed with two inks. It would be printed with a black ink and a 80% gray ink, and there's no half toning either. It's all imagery, so there's no blending. So you have two plates that one on top of the other create that image. And so it's not a one color where it's black with a dot matrix to make the 80%. This is two inks used to create one piece, and the two inks help this dark gray become really nice and saturated instead of looking like dotty and creating an extra pattern in there. All right. We have the type. Well, there's a big mix in here. And I like the way that they're playing around. The main information is almost the purest white. But what makes it stand out is it's not fuzzy. So we have a contrast of sharp versus fuzzy. We also have the contrast of pure white versus the dark area. But here I would even say this text is black. So we have a contrast there. We know what we're reading. We see this big, bold white font with black text underneath. There's a contrast right there. Then we have the, what I just mentioned. We have the sharp corners of the type with the fuzzy background. And then we just kind of keep overlapping that and distorting more and more the further back we go. And it's kind of creating a spatial contrast where we see the fuse is up front, all right? Then the secondary fuse here is background and fuzzy. Then we have another fuse running actually this way, which is even bigger and more distorted. So we have 3 then levels of fighting contrast within the piece itself. And then you have some extra information down there. But so this piece that you may say is like really, well, it all kind of looks the same, gray. There's contrast happening within the piece. It just, you kind of have to find it. Pure contrast right there. I don't know if the background color is intentionally that yellowish, but whatever, it works. And it's pure black. I'm going to call it, for the sake of this piece, pure black and pure white. One color only. You can't get much more contrast than this, can you? And they're working with different size fonts. We're starting with the big font here, all the way down to the small font. So what's most important? What did I just talk about in those, in the other pieces? This is the biggest piece you should be looking at, contrasted with this, which is, the information. Our hearts beat louder. That's what they want you to know. And then we're passionate about the web. Why? Oh, because you're passionate, and then you can find out more. It's 1 to 2 to 3, and it's contrast. If everything's the same size, we don't know what to read first. That's why when you read a book, a novel, all the text, for the most part, let's say a novel with no pictures, it's all the same size font because it's all the same importance. And what's in the story that you read is what it's important, but they don't want to call out anything. You're reading the book. If they made bold words within the novel that you were reading, you would think they're doing this to set it off for me. And you wouldn't read that book in the same way. It'd be very confusing. But here, because we're trying to convey information as graphic designers, we're conveying information to people. I want them to see this. I want them to feel like, oh, I feel all sweet because, they're talking about our hearts beat louder. And that, what is it about? We're passionate about the web, and then you read more, but you may be like, I like this company because, big front and center. And that's how you work with the contrast on this piece. Single, all that shading is just done with lines, drawing brought in, one ink, one pull on the old printing press. These last two deal with a lot of color contrast. Warms next to cools, brights next to darks. Just a great play of everything that's going on. The black next to the lighter colors on the side. Everything looks splashy and coming together. It just, just everything is going on that can go on in this piece. But the bold contrast, even though there's, and they did it in such a good way, there's color in it. There's a beautiful amount of color in here. Still, it's not a dead space. I would call this was done for a reason. It's not a dead space, but compared to this background, it really jumps out. it pops forward. And then you have, which I like even more, is you have an interplay 3 times, is you have this really great bold image contrasting, jumping off of this background because it's fuzzy. This is sharper, this is fuzzier. But then you contrast here with this dark text up here, which brings this forward. And then down here, oddly, this then comes even more forward, even though it's the same colors as the color background. So it's like there's a good play of like creating these artificial, like what's coming forward, what am I seeing first, next, the other one. Just a great little piece there. And just showing like it's like it's in a good way, like it's the messy of messy for, it's paint splashes and color blending, and it's a little bit of everything in the illustration, but they still work everything together so well. iPod. These are so old now. That's so funny. Like, but there's people who don't know what this is. iPod. Apple came out with the iPod. It was an MP3 player. It wasn't the only one around. There's other people that made them. But they came out, what they were famous for is the iPod came out and it was white and it had a white cord and headphones. Before that, everybody had black cords on their headphones, and the earbuds were somewhat new. People are still using headphones, these little weird foamy balls on your head. The earbuds were kind of new as well. So what set it off, when people saw your headphones, that's all they needed to see to know that you had an iPod, which then at that point in time, you were cool. Like, oh my gosh, you have the white headphones, you have an iPod. And it didn't take long for every manufacturer of headphones to start making their headphones white, which is great. Like, they started an entire trend. They took something that was normal, that was a non-thought about design feature, the cord that runs from my music playing machine, be it cassette or CD player. So I kind of want CD player, or even some MP3 players pre-iPod. The cord was black because black is the cheapest color to make rubber in that covers wire, and that's why. So Apple said, we're going to change it. We're going to make it white, and we're going to make our headphones white, and it's going to stand out in the crowd. And our iPod is white. It's not just gray. There's a time when all manufactured audio goods are all made in gray. They're like, no, white. And then so what they did is they do these stark color backgrounds with a silhouetted person dancing with the white iPod and earpods, or whatever they call them, earbuds. It was a huge hit. And they would do these in all different colors, yellow, orange, different people dancing. And as they did them over time, they actually started taking out the contrast of the person, and then started letting you see more and more of the person. And they started adding more of the color into the background until they eventually just the iPhone became the iPod. But there's a whole story behind this design and for the years and why it was famous. And that's the story. It goes back to this idea of them doing something different than everybody else and then showing it and making it a status symbol that you knew this is showing up. To be cool, the status symbol is the white cord. And now it's just the white thing in your ear. So contrast. There you go. That's the world of contrast. Now, before we go, because I'll talk more about the next phase of your poster design on Thursday, but I want to this is this week, next week, because then it's final, is just to make sure that we're all on the same page with what's due, because I haven't seen much come through. And it's a rough draft. We're not computers yet. All right. We're still sticking around. We're still looking and just figuring out. And we're figuring out with the assets that we got. I have the logo. I know what the logo looks like. So I should be able to roughly represent that quickly-ish in a 2x3 format. I know what images I have. I know the amount of text. I know the headline. I have all the information. And so it's going from loose to now understanding. This is what it's going to look like. The reason being is that you go from this stage. So if I'm your client, I can confidently know that things are going to be in this order next time I see it. Because next time I see it, you are going to place in, and which we'll talk about. We're going to bring this image into Illustrator, and you are going to place all your stuff directly on top of where you placed it in this drawing. And that's why we do it. So then when me, the client, sees it in the next version to get approval as you work through the process, I'm not shocked at what I see and be like, remember we agreed with the rock hand, but like, why is, all the images somewhere else? I agreed to something. So what we do is we get to this stage and we place everything in, and then we tweak it from there. So this is the more refined. And then I know the colors are going to be this. I want a broken marble effect. I want to use these fonts. The photos have a ripped effect, and the background will be broken marble / concrete. I can describe it. Why do I have to do this? What if you're not in that meeting? What if you can't make the meeting? What if your client's in California? What if your client's in a different, area? They can't meet with you. You send them this with notes so they can read through it and be like, okay, out of these two, I go with number one, the one with the rock hand, go for it. And then that next round, that client is expecting to see everything that you wrote about. The reason why I'm hammering on this a little bit, and I think I did this last week, is you're kind of setting up a contract with instructor, client, whoever's paying you expects to see this. And if you change it, you broke contract. They can look at it and be like, this looks nothing like what you sent me before. I'm not paying. You're like, what do you mean you're not paying? Like, or go back to what it was that I agreed for. And then you spend time going backwards in your design and redesign, doing what you originally did. And it doesn't matter. You're like, well, but I had this great new idea that came later. Here's the thing. When you're working in graphic design, the great ideas need to be here. Not later on here when the client is really expecting like, oh, I want to see flames. Where are the flames? Blah, blah, blah. So that is what's due tonight is this. 2 very well laid out. I know exactly where your things are going to go, and you're right up on what it should look like. So there we go. And then Thursday, I'll go over the next phase in dropping in things and how to kind of start to work with Illustrator, though we have, which is going to make it easy. I've already taught you, I've been teaching you how to do some of that stuff already. So it just is going to make it easier. And if you're in the illustration class, it makes it even easier. So that's where we're at. Any questions about contrast or the poster?
Do you want us to keep just adding on to the, we did the initial slide presentation for the poster showing all the elements of it. Do you want us to just keep adding on to that with like the rough drafts and stuff and resubmitting it with the added sections on?
Exactly. Yes. The question was about how do we keep doing the presentation? Exactly like you saw it. I want the beginning, and then you add to it. You're going to keep adding to it because I go back and I look, and I'll be like, and then that makes it so I don't have to go back a week, open up your old work, try to look at what you used to do in the past. It's all right there. And then the client knows. Like you show the client, like, this is our work through process. These are your assets. I did research. And then here are my thumbnails. They can look at the thumbnails and then they know what they got each time. I don't always include it. Like I'm working with a client right now on a piece and they're very particular. And so they ask me for something and then I do it and I send them the revisions. I don't include the past for them because of the particular client. I don't want them going backwards. We just want to kind of keep moving forward. But there's other clients where I keep that in just so they can see like, oh, this is all the work you've been getting out of me. So, it's just kind of the rub it in. So, all right, cool. Well, I look forward to seeing what transpires tonight. And I will talk to you Thursday about poster development and starting to work on those. All right. Yeah. And it's Halloween. It'll be Halloween. All right. Talk to you Thursday. Bye-bye.